How close is the Devil Wears Prada caricature to the real Anna?
The Devil Wears Prada is a cartoon version of Conde Nast. But like any cartoon, there are germs of truth. It's a cutthroat place to work.
Mike Grynbaum, welcome to the Golden Age.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. I'm happy to be here.
This is very exciting. I loved your new book. You call the Conde editors the influencers of their time. What do you mean by that?
So, before Instagram and before TikTok, when we had so many online ways to find out about the culture and trends and things going on in the world, the zeitgeist was packaged monthly in these pulp and ink objects that we call magazines, and they would kind of get dropped into your mail slot by the postman. And that is really how, for so long, Americans accessed the excitement and the sophistication of what was happening in places like New York and Los Angeles and London. And the reason I use the term influencers to talk about these editors is not just because they were social arbiters and gatekeepers, which they absolutely were, but Conde Nast, the company, wanted its editors, they wanted their lives to be top to bottom marketing campaigns for the magazines themselves. So Graydon Carter having a 24-hour chauffeur and driving around town in a beautiful black town car, or editors with wardrobe allowances so they would show up at parties in Paris in the latest designs from the couture runways. It was all about creating this mystique and projecting this image that Condé Nast was the height of refinement. And that's what got readers interested, wanting to have a piece of what those magazines were depicting. And it also was what attracted advertisers to want to put their products in front of that audience. So I think influencer talks to both the cultural influence, but also the commercial strategy of Condé Nast at its height.
And were you one of those readers growing up?
Yeah, I absolutely was. I grew up in the suburbs. I grew up in New England, and it wasn't that I wasn't close enough to New York City to like actually go there more than, a couple times a year. And I love newspapers. I grew up reading the Hartford Courant, which was a great regional paper. And when I discovered magazines, it was like opening up kind of this world of possibility to me. Like, I'd read these writers telling their tales of flying around Europe to interview subjects, or, living at a beautiful hotel for 2 months to bring back their story. And it kind of made me think that, writing and journalism could be this really adventurous and even glamorous at times profession. And I think as a kid, that just had a huge impression on me.
It feels like Conde has been in the news a lot lately. A lot of that is because of your book, but also because of Anna's announcement that she would pull back from Vogue. You had Graydon Carter's book. There was this Vanity Fair search. So why do people care so much about the Conde Empire?
Yeah, I've been really fortunate. I was saying it was very convenient of Anna to make this announcement that she was relinquishing the Vogue editor-in-chief title 2 weeks before my book came out. I swear I didn't ask her to do that. It just kind of worked out. But we are in this moment. I'll add to that, by the way, they're making a Devil Wears Prada 2.
Right.
So we're going to see Miranda Priestley and Andy Sachs, back on the big screen. I've been thinking about this a lot. I cover the media for the New York Times in my day job, and the media right now, our information system right now is so chaotic. Like, we are bombarded from the time we wake up with push alerts and, social media accounts on our phone. And it's really hard to make sense of all that. And I think that the 90s and the era when magazines were so powerful was a time when we had curators who could kind of say to us, hey, this is important. Hey, this is a movie worth seeing. These are the trends in design or fashion that are worth following. In a funny way, I think we have a bit of a yearning for that sense of order. Like, things are so bewildering now. And I think that there's a nostalgia element that's kind of in the air at the moment. And I think it's why people got a kick out of Graydon's, memoir, which was so charming and like so vivid in its evocation of the era of great magazines. And then the fact that Anna Wintour, or I should say, the fact that Vanity Fair and Vogue are going through these transitional moments is a reminder that people still care about these brands. Like, do they subscribe to the print magazine? Maybe not. But Vogue and Vanity Fair, they're still recognized all around the world. And I've been impressed with how much interest there is in which editors are going to come in to take them over.
And I thought the Bezos wedding shots of Lauren Sanchez proved that Vogue still has staying power within the fashion world.
So I totally agree with you. So what was so fascinating about that was a lot of the discourse was mocking Vogue. Why are they featuring Lauren Sanchez? Is Lauren Sanchez worthy of the Vogue imprimatur? Implied in all that is that the choices that Vogue makes still matter to people. It still gets people talking. And if you sort of believe the world of fashion influencers, like, who cares what Anna Wintour thinks? I can find out about trends from any number of DIY fashion, influencers online. And yet Vogue still stands for something. Like, it still represents the establishment. It still represents a certain social approval. And so the discourse around Lauren Sanchez, like, to me was just like, the message to me was like, people still care about Conde Nast, even though they say they don't.
One person that has not been on the cover of Vogue in recent years is the First Lady Melania Trump.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Yeah. It's funny because I feel like I hear it in MAGA media. It will come up every once in a while how insulting it is that Vogue has not given Melania the First Lady portrait. So let me go back and say, and I didn't realize this until I started reporting my book, but Donald Trump proposed to Melania Trump, or Melania now, as she was then, on the red carpet at the Met Gala in 2011. So he was kind of taking advantage of like the
2004, in 2004, I think, right?
2004. Thank you, Andrew. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. See, this is why I need a fact checker at all times. But right. Like, he was taking advantage of like the Vogue, publicity machine to do that. So my best understanding is that after Trump won in 2016, Anna Wintour did speak to Melania's staff about a feature, but the cover was not guaranteed. And that was not taken kindly in Trump world. And so they passed on it. And then since then, Anna has actually come out pretty vocally against Donald Trump, not just in being a fundraiser for the Democratic Party, but also pledging not to invite him back to the Met Gala. So there is, she will be the first in sort of an unbroken line of first ladies to not get the full Vogue treatment. So, as I guess it's as political as Vogue might get.
You mentioned the Met Gala. That is still one of the most popular events in celebrity world of the year. I think you've said in previous interviews, the New York Times dedicates almost a dozen writers just to cover it. Vanity Fair's Oscars party is still incredibly popular. Is it fair to say that the future of Conde is an event?
I think there's a lot to that, actually, Andrew. And I would say, so an innovation they had recently is this thing called Vogue World, which is essentially, it's almost like a pop-up theme park for Vogue. They've had them in different cities, but to me, the most impressive one was they shut down the Place Vendôme in the middle of Paris.
Right.
Had
And I think it's going to Hollywood next.
That's right. Hollywood's the next stop. And they bring in, like, just an incredible amount of celebrities and singers and it gets coverage all around the world. It's essentially like a marketing stunt. Mark Guiducci was the Vogue editor who was really the point person on that project. And he got the nod to become the next editor of Vanity Fair. And I think that experiential parts of this empire are becoming more and more important. It's not dissimilar to what we see with like the Atlantic Ideas Festival or the way that other media outlets put on conferences. But in such a diffuse media world where, like, I mean, it's very hard for a magazine cover to stand out anymore, right? I mean, we don't have newsstands on the street. It's just one image among thousands that you see online. So to really stage like an IRL event and gather the, media interest around that is one of the last ways that I think Conde can really capture the imagination of the public. And I think we will see that expressed more and more in the business model of the company going forward.
Is that part of the reason why Anna is pulling back from Vogue? She doesn't want to be an event planner. She wants to focus on magazine content.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I haven't spoken to her about this decision specifically. She's 76 years old.
I'll have to double check that and
I'll double. Yeah, we can put it into the comments. But she's in her mid 70s, and I do think that there was kind of an acknowledgement in her statement that Vogue needed to be passed on to the hands of a younger editor who maybe is more of a digital native, more understands how the Vogue brand can be expressed in the online landscape. But I'll tell you this: first of all, the entire staff was shocked. They all got called into this 9 a.m. meeting, on a Friday morning. She makes this announcement, jaws dropped all around the room. And then I think she was taken aback by the reaction because Anna is still going to be the global editorial director of Vogue. She's still going to be the chief content officer of Conde Nast, which means that she's in charge of all the magazines except for the New Yorker. So she's not actually going away. But given how paramount a figure she is to the company, just the fact that she would give up the title was significant. And I think it does mean that the company is looking to the future and realizing that they're going to have to elevate someone new eventually.
the book goes into this, but you spoke to dozens of people who have worked at Vogue and have been around Anna. How close is the Devil Wears Prada caricature to the real Anna?
Yeah, it's probably the best known depiction of Conde Nast. So personally, I I think The Devil Wears Prada is one of the best movies ever made about work and about professional ambition. And I always thought that Anne Hathaway's friends in the movie were the villains because they keep telling her to like stop working so hard at her job and like go to their art gallery openings. And it's like, I don't know, she's working at a pretty powerful magazine. Like sometimes you got to put in the hours. Um, so look, The Devil Wears Prada is a cartoon version of Condé Nast. But like any cartoon, there are germs of truth. It's a cutthroat place to work. And the way you comported yourself, even down to the language you used, like there was a certain expectation that you would sort of not say negative things directly. I don't mean like Anna Wintour telling someone to do something, but among the equal editors, you always had to couch things in like sort of an upstanding language. You never wanted to deliver bad news directly. And I talked to all these people who worked there who felt like they had to master almost like a foreign language to succeed. And I do think it's true that what you wore mattered a lot. Um, a funny story is that Graydon Carter banned rubber soled shoes from the Vanity Fair office because he didn't like the squeak that they might make on the hardwood floor. He felt that would sort of, that was a jarring sound in what should be a very refined environment. So that's like a great example of what it was like to work at Conde Nast.
I think that example was missing from his memoir, but there were a few stories that were shared between the memoir and this book. So I was curious, did you speak with Graydon for the book, and how did he approach navigating the fact that he had a memoir coming out and there was this book coming out?
Yeah, well, they were independent. So first of all, I did interview Graydon several times for the book, and he was a great encourager of the project. And when I kind of pitched him on the idea, he thought that Conde Nast would make for kind of a great saga of American culture. And so he was pursuing the memoir at the same time I was working on my manuscript. I mean, the timing really was coincidental. I mean, I don't think either of us knew when our book was going to come out. I love Graydon's memoir. I mean, it is such an endearing and such a personal portrait of him in a way that, of course, only the subject can create. I mean, I'm never going to be inside Graydon's head, um,
But you
but
will wear his hat.
yeah. Oh well, I do. Well, I'm a big airmail fan, so
We love airmail.
I'm representing here on the podcast today. Um, Plus, I've got my hair is a little floofy, so I thought I'd pat it down a bit. Um, so was I nervous when I read his memoir? Yeah, because I was like, oh my God, is he going to scoop me on everything? And there were a few anecdotes in there that, I'd been kind of excited to have. And, he shared them first. And, that's kind of all part of the game. I think that there were stories that, I had the benefit of being an independent journalist here. And so I was able to talk to, dozens of people who had worked at Vanity Fair over the years. And so I think what I tried to do was talk what was it like for his assistants. Like I have a story about John Kelly, who your listeners probably know is the editor of Puck,
Puck.
the newsletter. Well, actually, they don't like
The kind of the modern Conde in many ways.
the modern
In
yeah,
some
yes,
ways.
the media company Puck, not just newsletters though. John will want me to say that. But John Kelly was Graydon Carter's assistant. And there's an amazing story where they're traveling to Milan together and Graydon loses this
Right.
prototype.
Was it Portfolio magazine?
It was Portfolio, the big business magazine that Conde launched in 2007. Graydon has one of like 6 copies of the prototype. He calls up John Kelly and says, I can't find this thing. I left it on a boat. John Kelly goes through a Devil Wears Prada style odyssey of like bribing gondoliers in Venice to try to find it in the lost and found, and he eventually gets it back to Graydon. And the funny thing about that story is that, I mean, Graydon probably didn't even know about it because, John Kelly went off and found the magazine for him. But it tells you so much about it. If you were an assistant to a Conde editor-in-chief, like the word no was not in your vocabulary, and you had to pull out all the stops to get them what they needed when they needed it. And I think John would say that the training he had working for Graydon was like the best possible preparation for becoming a leader of an organization, because it was just so intense and you had to learn such responsibility. Yeah, so there's just like people, it's just great tales about working there.
And Graydon in his memoir talks about his complicated relationship with Donald Trump. You go a level deeper and talk about the Newhouse's relationship with Trump and how the art of the deal. I think there was someone in the book who said it was almost uniquely, I forget the exact phrase, but it was almost uniquely a product of Cy Newhouse's imagination. Yeah.
That was Peter Osnos, who actually edited Art of the Deal for Random House, and it's actually an incredible kind of story that has rarely been talked about, which is that Cy Newhouse and Roy Cohn were best friends from boyhood.
From Horace Mann, right?
They carpooled to Horace Mann together from the Upper East Side. And actually, I found some old letters. I was, going through these archives of Cy's, and Roy Cohn ran student government campaigns at Horace Mann, and Cy Newhouse also was like a bit of a behind the scenes guy. And there's like funny just letters between them about, I don't know, the class secretary election of 1942 or
you have that would make a great airmail story. You should write that up. That would be
yeah,
fantastic.
There's actually a new biography of Roy Cohn that's coming soon by Kai Bird, who wrote American Prometheus, the Robert Oppenheimer biography. Right. I'm so excited to read it. But getting back to so Graydon Carter writes this GQ cover story, a profile of Donald Trump.
Graydon Carter.
Graydon. The E was still, yes, the E for Edward was still in the byline. And it's an amazing, it's a Richard Avedon photograph of Trump on the cover with that like kind of mercurial smug smile. It's like such an indelible image. And it sold like gangbusters. It was like the Trump bump. Like it was like hugely
the original Trump bump. Yeah, I think you described it as.
hugely successful issue of GQ. Cy Newhouse sees the numbers. He's like, geez, this Trump guy, like, he's box office. So he calls up the Random House. He had just bought Random House, which was like one of the great white shoe New York City publishing empires, and Cy gobbled it up in, I think it was 1980 or 1981. And he tells him, I want Donald Trump to write a book. And there's this amazing scene where Cy Newhouse goes with Peter Osnos to Trump's office in Trump Tower. They want to mock up the hardcover, and they actually bring like a Russian novel and put on like a fake dust jacket around it. And they present it to him, and it's got like Trump's face and Trump's name. And Trump just kind of stares at it and he says, make my name much bigger. And that was the start of the art of the deal. And there's also, and I have this in the book, this Ron Galella photograph of Cy, Donald, and Ivana together at the book release party under the waterfall in the Trump Tower atrium. And I mean, what an amazing image this is of like some of the most powerful people in the last decades of our culture, like joined together in this really kind of improbable way. And I think it really that book was one of the things that catapulted Trump out of the New York City tabloids and into the national imagination. I'll add one last thing, is that I interviewed Cy Newhouse's daughter, who regrets this legacy of her father's. And you know, she said, of course, how would anyone have ever known? I mean, there's so many events that happen in between. But she basically said, you know, it's something that the family regrets, that this was one of the early moments of Donald Trump being promoted to the country.
That brings us to Cy. Can you talk a little bit about his uniform, what he wore to the office every day?
Yeah. I mean, Cy Newhouse is a billionaire from one of the wealthiest families in America. He would wear a tatty gray faded New Yorker sweatshirt every day. He often wore a New Yorker baseball cap. He would sit in the cafeteria, kind of eating his lunch. And you know, I talked to some advertisers who would come in, and they were like, "Who's the little guy over there?" Like he was so unassuming and just never felt like he needed to dress to the nines like the rest of the people at the company.
How was he shaped by Sam Newhouse and Mitzi Newhouse as parents?
Yeah. So, um, this I didn't know any of this when I started reporting the book. Sam Newhouse, who was Cy's father, was a newspaper magnate, and he controlled hugely lucrative papers in smaller markets like Syracuse, New Jersey,
Staten Island.
Staten Island's the Advance, which is where the whole Newhouse family got started. Um, and so Cy grew up, he was wealthy. I mean, he was, he was the firstborn of a very wealthy businessman. But Sam was actually the son of Russian immigrants, Russian Jewish immigrants. He was born into a tenement, on Orchard Street on the Lower East Side. And so Cy, he grew up in a building on Park Avenue. It was one of the only Park Avenue buildings that rented to Jews back in the 1930s when they moved in. And what's so interesting was there was this whole other earlier generation of German Jewish, mostly banking families like the Loebs and the Lehmans, who were sort of they had, our crowd was their sort of Jewish upper class society in Manhattan at that time. And Cy, for all his wealth, was an outsider to that. His family was not at the same social echelon as some of these other Jewish families in Manhattan. And so Cy actually was an outsider in his own world. I think he was always kind of looking through the glass. And Mitzi, his mother, who the theater at Lincoln Center, of course, is named after. Mitzi loved art. She loved society. She wanted to get to all the best parties, to hang out with all the most fashionable people. And Cy really inherited that from his mother. So he is like such a fascinating amalgam of this very particular mid-century wealthy Jewish world of the Upper East Side. And I that was one of the most interesting parts of my research.
I actually thought the Jewish culture / assimilation current throughout the book was super interesting. Even Cy's name is a product. I mean, he's named after his father, and which is not common in Jewish culture. And you write about how it sort of uh, encapsulates how the new houses tried to assimilate, or what? How would you describe it?
I think sort of they aspire to that WASP establishment, to that Eastern establishment, and you're absolutely right that typically in Jewish families you don't name the son after the father. So Sinuas's first wife is still alive. She's in her 90s,
That
Jane.
was amazing. I couldn't believe it when you said, I think you sat in her apartment and interviewed her. It
She
was hard.
lives in the same um, Upper Park Avenue co-op that she and Cy lived in together when they were married. She got it in the divorce. This was, I think the divorce was finalized in 1961 or 62.
Is Pamela the daughter you speak to from that marriage?
Yes, she is. Yes. And by the way, it's a beautiful apartment. It's that building. It's like, I think it's 94th Street, and it's like a courtyard building with a porte cochere.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's totally beautiful. Although Mitzi was not thrilled with the address. She thought it was too far north.
She called it Harlem, or what? She had
Yeah,
some.
she said, I think you're practically in Harlem here. This is like 93rd and Park Avenue, which
Right.
tells you how much it tells you how much social gradations mattered in the Newhouse home, which you sort of see then projected onto the magazines. But going back to Jane, so I interviewed her. You know, we spoke for about an hour, and she told me all about her time with Cy. And she by the way, you know, they had a very cordial separation and stayed in touch through all of Cy's life. But when she brought out some of her papers, I was delighted to find a holiday card that she and Cy had sent to out to family and friends in, I think it was 56 or 57. And it says, Merry Christmas from Cy and Jane. And they're a Jewish family. And that was it. Like, that was about them wanting to be part of that Gentile, like waspy world that kind of ran New York City in that era.
Yeah, I always find stories about old money Jewish families to be fascinating. We know so much about the Murdochs. We know a lot about the Redstones. We know about Brian Roberts and his family.
Hmm.
We know about the Sulzbergers. We, until this book, didn't know a ton about the new houses. Why is that?
It's kind of amazing how they have managed to stay up below the radar all these years. I'd say a couple things. Advance Publications, which is the holding company of the new houses, it never went public. So the finances to this day are just utterly opaque. And so, you know, even the amount of information they have to disclose to the public is quite limited. I think that honestly, the power of these magazines in some way was a deterrent for some writers of pursuing this story. There's an excellent biography of Cy Newhouse called Citizen Newhouse from 1998 or 1999, and I remember that there was some sort of diktat. I'm going to mispronounce it. Some sort of rule that came down from the Newhouses that none of their newspapers and none of their magazines should cover it. And so the author Carol Felsenthal has written about this, that she felt that it was kind of, you know, suppressed. I would also say that they've always avoided the public limelight. I wrote handwritten letters to Stephen Newhouse, to Jonathan Newhouse, who are the family members in charge now of Conde Nast, and they never replied. I ran into Jonathan at a party in London, and I introduced myself, and you know, he's very polite. He said, "I know about your book, but the family has chosen not to participate." And they let's just add, they have an enormous stake in Charter Communications, the giant telecom company. They they up until 2 weeks ago they had a huge stake in Warner Brothers Discovery. They actually just recently sold about $1 billion worth of that stock, which is a whole other interesting story. But you know, the new houses are diversified. They made $2 billion on Reddit's IPO. They're really one of the most powerful media families in America, but yeah, they haven't really attracted the kind of scandals or tabloid interest, I guess, that you see with the Redstones or the Murdochs and these other families. And yeah, they've kind of avoided it.
So we'll wrap it up here. You've mentioned that they sold their Warner Brothers Discovery stake. It
Yeah.
seems like they sold their Reddit stake when it IPO'd, right? They no longer have.
No, I don't think that's true. Actually, I think they
Okay,
do still have a large amount. They may have taken some out just to,
got
but
it.
they're still quite. Yeah, I think they're big shareholders.
Do you think they'll ever sell Conde?
So when I heard about this WBD sale, I was like, wow, like what do they need this capital for? I did do some reporting on that. I think that to some degree, there was some discontent with David Zaslav's management of the company. I mean, the stock since the IPO has fallen a lot, which means the Newhouse's own, investment has shrunk over the last 2, 3 years. I do think that smaller Conde Nast assets will go on the market. The question is Vogue and Vanity Fair and the New Yorker, which I see as the core Conde titles, and really for the Newhouses, almost family heirlooms. They mattered so much to Cy. It was the pride of his life that he bought the New Yorker, sustained it, kept it going, doing the sort of investigative journalism that it does. So right now, Cy has a brother named Donald. This goes back to the dynastic element that you, I think, very smartly brought up. So Cy has a brother named Donald Newhouse, who is, I think, in his late 90s. He's retired. He lives in the family estate in New Jersey. I'm told he's in great health. Until he passes away, I don't think the younger generation would touch something like Vanity Fair or Vogue because Donald would take it as an insult to his brother. I think Donald is sort of wants to, protect Cy's legacy. Once Donald passes away, you're going to have younger generations that are less emotionally attached to these properties. Vogue, it was the whole company started with Vogue back in 1909. It's so core to the place. I don't think the New Yorker they'd let go because they see it as a public trust. Could Vanity Fair take on an outside investor? I know Jay Penske's been interested in Vanity Fair in recent years. I think Todd Bowley, the billionaire investor, has expressed some interest. I'm not going to say never, and I've got a paperback coming out in a year, so I'm gonna hold off until I have time to do an afterword. But I do think Conde, if those assets came on the market, it would be a really fascinating media sale. It would be a great media story about who would take over these jewels of American media.
Well, we know that you'll cover it, and you'll cover it in great detail in the paperback in a year, and probably the New York Times as well. The book was so good. It was called Empire of the Elite. You can buy it wherever books are sold. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. And I love the podcast. And I'm so glad we got to talk a bit about the social and class history of the Newhouses in the book. I think it's so much a part of the story. You can't separate it. And I'm glad that people are thinking about it.